but I think is this very important discussion of public policy issue. The League, for those of you who are not members, the League was formed in 1979, and we're dedicated to ethics and advocacy and education. This is the education part of it. If you're not a member, please join. On the back of, you got an offer, you know. This day only for the next hour. You can join and receive the rest of 2011 for free, and it gives you the address on the web where you can join. I mentioned a moment ago that this was one of the most important public policy issues, and it's about finance, and yet the two intersect significantly. And in a large sense, what people are saying about lobbyists, you know, if we're high paid, if we're influential, it's not necessarily the power of our words. It's a lot to do with money, and in that sense, it has a significant impact on our profession and on how we're viewed. And today we have two of the best journalists to discuss that subject. Tim Farnum reports on the intersection of money and politics for the Washington Post. His latest article, done with Dan Egan, was at least posted yesterday about noontime on the Washington Post website. It talks about all the money being raised by lobbyists for the presidential race in 2012. Previously reported for the Wall Street Journal, and has won awards for his work. Peter Overby, right next to me, is NPR's self-proclaimed power, money, and influence correspondent. Indeed, that is on his business card, so please ask him. I think it's perfect. Perhaps we should each, as lobbyists, try using that and see what happens to us. He's also won awards, including one for a piece he did on the 2001 Senate vote to tighten the rules on campaign finance. One piece that he did that I found out about is I did a little bio research, particularly interests me, Peter, because it's on a lobbyist who shot a journalist, or the reverse, actually.
No, it's a lobbyist shot the journalist.
Yeah. And basically that may give you some pause for being here, or you got some pause, I guess. We didn't check you for weapons, but it demonstrates some of the danger that we all face when we come into contact with each other. But I thought also it's interesting commentary on the congressional and lobbying atmosphere going on in the late 19th century, which also ties into a little plug for our annual meeting on November 16th, which you can find out about at our website, where we have one of our speakers, our luncheon speaker, talking about the king of the lobby, who was Sam Ward, in the late 19th century, in a book that she's done. It also ties into the issue of what the atmosphere of what we are doing and the impact that what we're doing as lobbyists, that is, in terms of the divisions that are going on in Congress, which we'll be exploring a little bit more next year in a couple of programs that will be follow-ons to this. Having said that, I've done my piece, and Tim, would you like to begin?
Sure, thank you. It's really an honor to be speaking to a room full of the most elite, power-hungry, high-paid sellers of access in the country. I actually had trouble finding this room because I thought it would be a back room. Joking aside, I think the work that lobbyists do is very important, and there's I think one of the biggest flaws of the current structure of DC is that politicians have most of the power in this town, and they use it. They frequently use it to beat up on lobbyists, because it's a good excuse for not doing their own jobs, and then of course turn around and hit them up for campaign contributions. And that's of course what we're here to talk about is the role of money in DC and the impact of Citizens United, which will turn 2 years old in January. Very briefly, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but the Supreme Court decided the case to allow corporations and unions to give unlimited amounts for money directly attacking or supporting candidates. They've frequently been allowed to give large amounts of money, but just not to use the most harsh advertisements. And last cycle, the 2010 midterm, it felt like there was a big effect, perhaps because of all the breathless coverage that Peter and I made. But I think it's only going to get larger, and the case is continuing to unfold, and I wanted to tell you sort of about new developments there. One of the things we've seen in the presidential primary is this concept of a candidate super PAC, where the super PAC spends and raises unlimited amounts of money from anyone, and there are aides to candidates who have set these up, and they're essentially like de facto campaigns. I think I would not be surprised at all to see super PACs aligned with each candidate raise and spend more money than the candidates themselves. I think that's going to be a story that we'll write in a month or two once the fundraising by these committees is revealed. They're also replacing the party committees in a way. Both sides of the aisle and Capitol Hill have set up super PACs that will allow them to raise money. I think there's precious little difference between how these groups operate and how campaigns or parties can operate. Because of FEC decisions, candidates can now show up at fundraisers for the groups. They're not allowed to actually ask for any contribution over a $5,000 limit, but they're allowed to be there and to speak. And then one of the new things that the FEC is considering now is whether super PACs or independent groups or even trade associations, any sort of interest group, could actually work with the candidate to run advertising. So the candidate could come in, film an ad, and then tell the group where they want the ad run and how much money they should spend. Everything along those lines, as long as the ad does not talk about the campaign. The politician could talk about their record, issues in the campaign, as long as they don't say, and vote for me or defeat my opponent. There's American Crossroads asked the FEC to weigh in on this, and they should decide soon. It would be a big change. And I think this points at one of the important things here is that the law is getting more complicated, not less. I think the Supreme Court, when they were deciding Citizens United, said, we need to clarify things. Some things are legal, some things aren't. How can we change, how can we tell what people can say in certain situations and not others? But it's really just gotten more befuddled and confusing. Politician can go to a fundraiser for a super PAC, but they're not allowed to say certain things at that event. That's very confusing, and it's sort of the opposite effect that the Supreme Court was going for, I think. One of the biggest pitfalls is coordination. Candidates now can't work with aides or with super PACs, interest groups, to say which the hard-hitting election ads should go where. But people often point to this as it's liberating for candidates because they can have interest groups do their dirty work without being associated with it. I don't think voters can tell much of the difference, and it creates sort of these technical violations and things are going to be a big headache for operatives. But voters, I don't think, will really be able to tell the difference and won't be affected by it. One of the big questions is whether this would actually change who gets elected. I don't think it will matter much in the presidential race, but it does give Rick Perry something of a fighting chance, because no one's quite ready to write him off with the amount of money he's raised, but also the donors that he has who will likely kick into his super PAC. In the Senate and the House, I think it plays a huge role. Independent groups play in the primaries in a way that the parties don't. Parties usually try to avoid primaries. And independent groups are often in there to get their candidate elected, and will trash the establishment candidate if they have to. And then in the general election, when we start seeing Democrats versus Republicans, I think it'll only matter if the Republicans can keep their head start. This is very much an arms race, and building these groups takes time. The Democrats are very committed to it at this point, but they are definitely still behind. As for what it means for lobbyists and people doing policy in DC, I think in one sense it means that you can provide more help to the politicians that favor your positions, who like you. It also means that you could politicians can come to you and ask for more money, and maybe even punish people who don't commit with donations. It sort of remains to be seen to the extent that that'll happen. People have always raised the specter of big corporations getting directly involved in these groups and in these elections. Fortune 500 companies, Coca-Cola, what have you. I personally am going to bet that it's not going to happen. This is, at least right now, it's very toxic for corporations to put their brand on the line and give donations. But I think if politicians get more and more involved, it would lend the sort of credibility that soft money donations had, where a corporation could give to the party committees 6- and 7-figure checks. As it is now, the only people like to talk about corporations giving money. It's really only the sort of closely held corporations that do it. The only Fortune 500 company I'm aware of that gave to a super PAC was the American Financial Group, which is this reinsurance company in Ohio. But it's, although it's publicly listed, it's mostly owned by Carl Lindner and his family, so they have more control over that company. I don't think any executive who's answering to shareholders will really get involved at this point. And if they do, they'll probably do it through trade associations and the Chamber of Commerce and groups like that. I think who will be the biggest players is sort of the same crowd that we saw in 2004 with 527 groups, the highly motivated rich people and others who like George Soros, for instance, who gave $27 million for Kerry. I think we'll definitely see a reprise of that, and one individual topping that. And it'll be very interesting to see. And with that, I'll turn it